So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at some of the joint anatomy of the back and really get a better understanding of this long, unique spine that we have. The human spine is one of the most unique body parts in the entire animal kingdom. We are the only creature on the whole entire planet that is designed specifically to walk perfectly upright. So what the body has done is that the body has been shaped and is designed to be able to be on two legs where we can walk right straight forward, where we can sit up. And so it's very unique. The spine has a tremendous amount of bones within it. And because there's so many different bones from the cervical spine to the thoracic spine, down into the lumbar spine and the sacrum, is that there are a tremendous amount of bones, or not bones, but joints. And all of these joints have to be able to articulate with each other and move freely and effortlessly. And what can happen to all of these joints within this spine is that when the fascial tissue and the musculature is contracting more hard than what it should on the left side versus the right side, or maybe the upper spine versus the lower spine, is that it could cause those joints to smash together harder than what they should. And we can see a wearing out of the lining of the joints. We can see this is where maybe a lot of the disc bulging and herniation is coming from. This can also, the muscles and the fascial tissue can contract so hard that it puts so much pressure in the bones that you can get stress fractures and deterioration within the vertebrae themselves. But we always need to keep in mind that the spine is actually just connecting the top half and the bottom half to each other. What I love about this image here is that we can really see that the spine connects the top and the bottom together, and it's essentially the bridge that allows the shoulder girdle to reach and do all the things that it does, and then it allows the legs to provide stability and support, and for us to be able to walk, run, and jump. And the spine has to be able to integrate all that together in a very balanced way. And because the spine is so long, and even in shorter people like myself, where we aren't necessarily have a super long spine, that proportionality can get out of balance pretty easily. From our movement habits, our jobs and our activities are all affected, and they have a tremendous impact on the joints and the bones within the spine. Now, the bones are supposed to act like spacers, but the bones also have a very unique job within the spinal column itself, or for the spinal column, is that the bones provide a place and a safety mechanism for the spinal cord to be able to travel down the length of the spine. And that's why it's so important that the health of your spine is as optimal as possible. Some other interesting things to keep in mind about this spine is that as the ribs come off and around from the back side of the body and they attach around into that sternum, is that maybe some of the musculature in your rib cage is not quite contracting or relaxing appropriately. And if it's over contracted, as it pulls on any of these ribs, the ribs attach to the vertebrae, and that can shift and cause some problems within your body as well. So again, where you're experiencing pain does not necessarily mean that's exactly where your problem is at, which is why with the Relief Through Rolling curriculum, we've been able to develop a way to be able to address the entire region together, so you're actually able to facilitate big picture long-term change within your body. So again, the skull sits on top of the spine, and then that spinal column houses the most vital aspect of our entire body, which is our spinal cord. Now, what can get very tricky about the spinal column is that if any of those vertebrae are displaced, or if there's too much pressure on one side, one of the discs is herniated or bulging, or the vertebrae itself is just shifted over, is that as the peripheral nerves leave the central nervous system and they kind of have to go out through that spinal column, there could be compression or pressure within there that can put a restriction on the nervous system. So again, we can't always figure out exactly where that's happening, and even if you get good diagnostic imaging, it could show that the spine is totally in alignment, everything is good, but the fascial tissue, muscle tissue could be compressing on any of these nerves right as it's leaving the spinal column, either into your rib cage or out into your shoulders or down into your hips. So keeping in mind that everything is connected is a vital element to what we're doing here. This is another one of my most favorite images. We can see the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, which the peripheral nervous system is at the nerves that are leaving the spinal column, going down into the legs, out into the ribs, out into the hands. And the important thing about the nerves is that they all are connected. They are all completely thinking and feeling all together at the same time. So if we have some dysfunction anywhere within the spine, it can get related to another part of the brain, and maybe the brain is saying I'm having some left arm pain when I'm actually having a back issue, or vice versa. Maybe you could be having some restriction in a left shoulder and it's telling you that your thoracic spine in that region are hurting when that's not necessarily the case. So what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at some of the connective tissue anatomy for the back. Now, what's so fascinating about the connective tissue in the back is that there's so many different layers of tissue throughout the whole entire rib cage and the back. And what happens is that this musculature, at every layer, it goes different directions. And what's so interesting about this, again, as we talk about the fascial tissue and how the connective tissues work together, is that if we have one layer of musculature that's sliding one way, if we peel that away, the next layer of musculature actually runs a different direction. So if I have one layer running east and west and another layer running north and south, what can happen is that when those start to glue together because of structural compensation or perceived pain or overuse or underuse or injury, is that fascial tissue can glue all that together. So when the muscle that's supposed to move up and down gets glued to the muscle moving east and west, now they could be playing tug of war with each other. Or maybe they're so glued together that they have each lost their ability to slide and function. And so a lot of people are dealing with so many issues, not necessarily because there's joint issues, but a lot of that connective tissue could be holding so hard, or it's putting pressure on the nervous tissue. And having a tool to be able to work through all of these areas together and look at them like a recipe or when you're building a house is a very important part of that process. So this back tissue also has areas where it starts off at the back of the body and it actually goes forward and inserts onto the front side of the body. So not only is there a left to right imbalance that can happen within the back and the spinal column, but there can be a front to a back imbalance that can happen as well. So if this latissimus comes off of my low back and it comes up and inserts onto the front side of my shoulder, if there's an imbalance in my shoulder, it can have an impact on the musculature in my low back. And so having a way to be able to understand those relationships is very important, and the Relief Through Rolling curriculum is going to be able to help you understand how those relationships work. So again, here's another picture where we've taken away this big outer musculature, and we can see if we have the outer musculature here, the muscle fibers are kind of going east and west, and then below that, some of the muscle fibers are now going, northeast and southwest, and we take that layer away and we can see all of the big long backstrap muscles, or the erector spinae musculature group, are all running north and south. And so again, as those layers all crisscross each other and go over top of each other, and there's a restriction in that connective tissue, it can really have an impact on the functionality and the health and the vitality of your body. Okay, what we're going to talk about next in regards to connective tissue is the buzzword fascia. Over the last 5 to 7 years in particular, the word fascia has blown up in the medical profession, in the personal training profession, in the Pilates and yoga professions, in the massage therapy world, in the medical world, in every capacity. And the reason that it's blown up was the medical world didn't understand how significant and how much volume of fascial tissue there was in the body. For the longest time, most medical professionals and anatomists and dissectors thought that fascia was just kind of on the outside of the body. And what has happened recently is that Dr. Gimbertu has discovered that there is actually that fascia literally covers and surrounds every aspect of our body. Fascial tissue, it would be like if I had a package of spaghetti noodles, and the spaghetti noodles are veins and nerves and arteries, or our muscle cells. The fascial tissue is what holds all of that together. And what happens is that this fascial tissue is glued in and connected to all of these different pieces and parts. Now, the thing to keep in mind is as much fascial tissue as there is, it's not all just about the fascial tissue. It's about all of the tissue combined together. It's about your skin, it's about your nerves, it's about your veins and your arteries, it's about your muscles and the bones and the ligaments. And so right now what's happening is that so many people are on the fascial train that they think that they can actually lengthen out the fascial tissue and they can just address the fascial tissue. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But this fascial tissue is very important. And if it's not healthy and if it's not moving the way that it's supposed to be moving, or supporting the body the way that it's supposed to be supporting, nothing else in your body can really work appropriately, but it's the combination of working all of this stuff together. So as we look at some of these images, at the microscopic level, fascial tissue really looks like a spider web material. And as you go down to a greater microscopic level, the fascial tissue really is, they're empty tubes. They're hollow tubes that are filled with water, and they're supposed to allow the muscle cells to slide appropriately. They're supposed to allow the nerves and the veins and the arteries to have a little bit of movement so things don't get too stuck or adhered together. And what can happen to that fascial tissue over time is that it starts to get sticky and thick and it glues things together. And there's a tremendous amount of sensory receptors in the fascial tissue as well. Your veins and your arteries, as we said, pass through that fascial tissue, and it's very fascinating at the microscopic level what it looks like inside a living human body versus the dissection world on where most of us have been taught anatomy throughout the years. And we're literally going from a world is flat to a world is round change right now in the anatomical world. But a very important part to keep in mind is that your skin is just as important to pay attention to as your muscles and your fascial tissue. Your skin, in fact, is the direct connection point into your nervous system, into your brain. Having the ability to safely adjust or address all parts of the body as we're putting pressure into the body is significant. So your skin has a tremendous amount of receptors in it, from heat sensors and pressure sensors and light sensors. It's really important that we understand, again, we're working all of these tissues together and we're never just picking one and saying we're addressing one type of tissue. And how I like to explain that to people would be, if we were to look at an orange and see how important this is that if the skin of the orange is the skin of our body, we're going to have all of these sections of the orange where we would have our orange slices if we were peeling that orange. And what people need to understand is that as I'm peeling the orange, there's this membrane that's connecting all of these parts together, and that would be your fascial tissue. But what happens is that people have been led to believe, and people have been taught over time, that we're touching only one specific thing. And what that would be like is that would be like me touching the outside of the orange and pushing into the orange and saying, okay, right now I'm only touching your muscle. Or right now I'm only touching your fascial tissue. Or right now I'm only touching this vein or artery. The truth is that when I touch this orange and I put pressure into the orange, I'm touching all of that tissue all at the same time, and I'm working it all together. So if we look at the similarity between an orange slice and a human body, we can see it's very similar. We have our thicker membranes where the fascial tissue separates muscles and it keeps parts of the orange in its specific spot. But the truth is that all of the veins and the arteries that are within here as well are all affected when I work through there, either with manual therapy of any kind and or self-care tools, especially with a foam roller, the way that we're going to work through the body with our Relief Through Rolling curriculum. So it's so important, and I really want you to just keep in mind that you're never just working one specific tissue, we're always working them together.